Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Claire, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Debs Kemp. Debs Kemp is a leader and teacher based in the southwest of England. In her career, she has led on CPD coaching and wellbeing. Debs is also regional lead for Women's Ed Southwest region. And today, Debs and I are talking about staff wellbeing and behaviour. Enjoy the episode. Hi Debs, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm a bit weirded out because we're in person doing the podcast and I normally do it over Zoom.
Yeah, it's very, very unusual, but really nice.
We're both quite close to the microphone, but we'll be fine, I think, with it as we go through. I'm really excited about the topic that we're talking about today. We're talking around wellbeing of staff and, in particular, I guess, wellbeing around dealing with behaviour that challenges. As we usually start off with the podcast, could you recommend a book on the topic?
Well, there's a really good, very accessible little book called Teacher Wellbeing and Self-Care by Emma Kell and Adrian Bethune. And I'd really recommend this. It's a really quick read, but it's got some really good top tips and advice. And it's a really good part of a series, so definitely recommend that one.
Amazing. And Dr. Emma Kell might have been on the podcast before as well, so it's very nice to cross-reference people. But with that book, you said it's really simplified. Kind of how is it simplified?
Well, it's just a really quick read. It gives you some ideas about wellbeing in terms of the institution and what sorts of things a school can do to help wellbeing for staff. It also talks about self-care, what you can do as a staff member, and it talks about how you can kind of support wellbeing in terms of teams and collaboration. So it's got lots of elements to it that can kind of fulfill the whole aspect of wellbeing in it. When you're working in a school, really important right now.
It is, and I was just thinking it'd be ridiculous to have a really, really like millions of pages long wellbeing book when teachers are so busy.
Yeah, exactly.
To actually have time to read a book on wellbeing probably isn't going to be there.
It's really handy. It's very, it makes you feel like you want to read it because it's just a very small size. You can put it in a bag and, it's just... whip it out when you want to read it, when you're waiting for something. It's great. It's a really nice read, very quick read, but lots of valuable information in it.
Amazing. We'll put that in the notes so listeners have access to that. And I suppose because we're talking about wellbeing, it'd be really good to have a quick chat really about your experience to do with the topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've worked in schools, for a very long time, and then most recently in some of my leadership roles and recent roles in mainstream school, I've set up what we've called a wellbeing team, and that's really about enabling staff to have a voice so that they can sit around, talk to each other, be really honest about what the issues are, what the positives are in their school, and highlight anything that could be dealt with differently. And I like to view wellbeing in 2 halves, really. Like the first half is, what things can we change about our systems and our, the way in which we lead our schools in order to support wellbeing. And you have to have sort of conversations with SLT about those areas. And then there's the other side, which are kind of the small little quirky things we might do, which could be deemed to be tokenistic if you don't deal with the system stuff. But they are nice, like daffodils at Easter and, mince pies at Christmas and opportunities to do staff bits and pieces that they might suggest. And there's a lot of stuff on Twitter about, wellbeing's not all about yoga. No, it's definitely not. But those things as extras are quite nice.
They are, they're lovely, aren't they? They're lovely things to have. And I suppose we're looking at this and we're thinking about staff that might be dealing with behaviour that challenges and how that can impact well-being. So I think a good starting point is to think about how behaviour that challenges can impact staff well-being. Maybe some examples that you might have seen as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most critical thing for staff is, well-being, it's nice to get a little cheery message or a daffodil or whatever, but if your day-to-day job is hard and tough, as it is for a lot of teaching staff in terms of behaviour, and if that's a daily issue, then that is going to affect your well-being, and that's just the kind of basic job of a teacher, isn't it, managing behaviour. So yeah, I mean, in terms of supporting well-being in terms of children and their behaviour, I think there's a couple of things. My experience is that where it works best is where teachers are given a really clear debrief if they've had a major incident in a classroom where behaviour has been particularly challenging. That member of staff needs to feel supported, and I've seen some really good examples where SLT, the head teacher, has come down and directly talked to that member of staff and reassured them that there will be follow-up, there will be sanctions, and that they will be communicated all the way through that process. That's where it works best. If a staff member isn't communicated with, then it leaves them in a bit of limbo. They don't know whether they're going to see that child in the class again, that following lesson. How do they prepare for that? I've worked in a school that's been very, very keen on producing, using restorative practice, and that's been really helpful structure so that you have really good conversations with students, with the staff member involved and that student, to restore their relationship before they go into the classroom. And I know you've done some work on that as well.
Yeah, I think when we're delivering Team Teach courses and we're thinking about the last stage of a crisis, which is stage 6, and we always think about restorative measures, I guess, at the very end of a cycle of crisis. But I find my experience of going into high schools, secondary schools, which I know is your background, is that that's the bit that's often missed. And for me as a practitioner, that's almost like the last bit of a jigsaw, where if we get that bit right, where we can restore with individuals and we can rebuild relationships, we can start to change things in a setting. But equally, the other bit that I think is missed, and again, I'm talking so generally about high schools, I guess this is my experience, is that debrief for staff and having a genuine bit of time with, it doesn't even need to be a member of SLT, but with someone, hopefully a manager, to kind of talk things through in an open and honest way. And I think well-being wise, what can happen is that if those debriefs do happen, they can be done poorly, and you can have members of staff leaving meetings thinking that they've done something wrong, they've caused the incident. And I'm not saying that we put blame back onto the child or young person, that's really not the point, but where all viewpoints are heard and listened to. Did you know that Team Teach also offers a coaching and consultancy service? It's an effective way to build positive cultures. Let's work together to map out a strategic plan tailored around your needs, support your staff with coaching sessions from our experienced team, and help you create, change and improve professional practice throughout your organisation. Visit the Team Teach website to find out more.
I think that's so critical. It's not, judgment on either side is really, really important. It's about coming to a place where both teacher and student can work well together to support them to progress in their lessons. And I think having that conversation away from the classroom is really vital, so that you can have a very straightforward, honest, well-facilitated conversation. That means that both parties can kind of agree. And it's not about, either party kind of casting blame on the other. It's just about being really honest and saying, oh, we got that wrong, didn't we? How can we make it better? And both wanting the aim to be that they're going to work well in the following lesson. And I've seen it work so brilliantly when it's approached in a really open, positive way. And we are, time is so difficult for teachers. And I think that is where we fall down sometimes in all schools, where we don't have time to have that debrief and we're rushing and, somebody hasn't managed to catch up with you before that student comes in or a restorative hasn't happened. But it's so critical to make time for that, because it just causes problems further on down the line if you don't. The other factor, I think, is parents as well. You know, it's so valuable having a conversation with a parent about the behaviour in a really positive, open way, without casting blame again, you know, talking about the situation rather than the child themselves. I think that really helps. It's all about having a voice, isn't it? I think wellbeing is about having a voice for the child, for the student, for the parent, for the staff member.
Yeah, being heard, isn't it? Being heard in every facet of what's going on. And I think I never really thought about parents, carers as part of that restorative bit. And I suppose, even though they're not directly involved in the incident, usually, should I say, that actually that debrief almost with the parent carer and how that's done sensitively but supportively can actually help to kind of, you know, complete the circle again. And
absolutely. I mean, certainly in my experience, most of my conversations with parents has been incredibly positive. And if you go in as a teacher feeling supported by the parent from the previous evening's phone call, then that can enable you to manage the behaviour of that particular child much better, because you feel well supported by them, and you can say, oh, I've had a chat, you know, they said they'd had a chat with you, you know, let's move on. It can be really positive, and it ensures that the teacher in the room doesn't feel on their own. They feel that there is a team, you know, it's the SLT, it's the other colleagues, it's the parents at home, and it's the child, and then you don't feel isolated, and that then doesn't build up to a wellbeing issue for that member of staff.
Yeah, can you use a really key word? You talked about the we in the debrief rather than, you know, what did you do? And I suppose we can sometimes talk to parents, carers in that way, and rather than using, you know, that glorious term we, where we're all working together to support someone. And I guess wellbeing wise, it's when we don't feel like we have that support where that can really impact our wellbeing negatively, because then we feel isolated as a practitioner, and I guess that can catapult, you know.
Definitely, and it can be a lonely job if you're not communicating with everybody who, you know, is part of that education process. So it's really important to connect and to feel heard and to be supported and to support the students in the room as well. I think, you know, that whole interconnectivity and collaboration, it's really important to remember that just because we all teach in a classroom on our own, actually there is a whole network of people you can draw in to help improve the behaviour in your classroom.
Yeah, having everyone around to support, even though they're not physically there, is really important. I wanted to draw us back to the point that you made about time, and that being a pressure and actually something that's quite hard to find in schools, to do that debrief restorative bit, which we're identifying is key for wellbeing. And I go into care settings quite a bit, residential care settings, and part of the standards with how care settings are governed is that they have to have legislatively a restoration, and they have to have a staff debrief. Like, that is mandated.
And I was thinking about counselling, because counsellors have to have supervision, don't they?
Yeah.
And yet, you know, teachers, you know, they don't have that written into their contract, but we probably need it. That's a challenge, though, isn't it?
It is.
Given recruitment and retention.
I know, yeah.
But it's so important, and I think especially if you're working in a setting where the behaviour is challenging, there has to be a way we can create a space for some kind of supervision feedback, you know,
environment,
debrief.
Yeah. And it is. I mean, in some schools that I got interviewed actually by someone on their podcast, and they talked about in their social, emotional, mental health setting that they were lucky enough to have supervision, and some specialist settings find the budget to, you know, be able to do that. But I suppose from a mainstream perspective, that's probably not going to be an eventuality. So I always think about it in those settings where you still have difficult things happen. So we know practitioners, you know, personally, that have had awful things happen with behaviour and witness really difficult things, and then you add in all the safeguarding issues that we might read about and hear from pupils. Like, there's a lot going on, but it's probably not going to be budgeted for. But I think about how we can set up that listening environment. You talked about a wellbeing forum and creating that supervision, and I know it's not quite the same as having a external professional person, but we can create the ethos and create the teams around people to have that bubble of support, I think.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and that's part of the kind of motivation for creating wellbeing teams in schools, is to at least give a voice for staff to feel that they can talk about any issues, concerns, and again create that sense of team so everyone's working together. I think collaborative meetings around individual students is really supportive. They can be really effective. I know that in schools that I've worked in, there have been groups that regularly meet about specific children, so that every member of staff can feel that, this student is behaving in this way for this member of staff as well. I don't feel, it's not me, it's we need to think together about what we can do in order to improve that student's behaviour. That's really helped. And just being collegiate with each other, I think that really helps. I do think staff are very good at especially within departments, at supporting each other and colleagues talking to each other about their day, and that can then identify if there's something that needs to escalate to a more managerial conversation about that behaviour. So that's really helpful. But it's very important not to feel isolated and think you're doing things, having to do everything on your own. I think that's the job of the school's leadership team, to create an ethos where staff feel they can share, they can talk, they can be open. They can say, I'm actually having real difficulty with this child, without there being any judgment at all, because it's always much more complicated than one individual teacher.
Yeah, it's way more complimented. It's way more complicated. It is a complicated topic, and I could actually spend a lot more time on this topic, but we are running out of time. So I just wondered if you could leave us with your 3 top tips.
Well, I would say, as we've been talking, to have that restorative conversation with the student before they come back into the classroom, even if it's a 5-minute, what can we do differently, what went wrong. I always think it's very important to listen to the student's point of view first, and so allow them time to give their opinion. Otherwise they won't be hearing you, because they'll just be thinking, I want to say this, I want to say that. But I would say restorative. I would also say communication is really vital from the SLT, the senior leaders, about what's going to happen with the students in terms of sanctions if there's been a behaviour issue, and keep those communications lines going. Communication across all parties is always going to be a top tip on most topics, to be honest. And then providing an opportunity to share, have a voice, a wellbeing team. If you don't have one in your setting, I think it's really important to ask for one. And there's lots of guidance about that, particularly in the book that I recommended at the beginning. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Amazing stuff. Really practical tips there, Debs. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll catch up soon.
It was lovely to talk to you again.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.